What happened in the remote Ozark Mountains of Missouri in 1834 challenges everything science thought it knew about the nature of reality itself. The official church records were sealed for over 90 years, but the truth about 19-year-old Prudence Hoffman became the subject of the most disturbing case study ever documented in early American frontier medicine. This channel is only for those brave enough to confront mysteries that authorities would prefer remain buried forever. The case that I'm about to share with you has been deliberately obscured by academic institutions for nearly 2 centuries. What you're about to hear comes from recently declassified documents found in the basement of the old Missouri State Capitol building, medical records that were hidden away because they describe phenomena that simply couldn't be explained by 19th century science and still can't be fully understood today. On the night of October 13, 1834, Prudence Hoffman vanished from her family's cabin during a violent thunderstorm that locals described as unnatural. But this wasn't just any storm. Weather records from 3 neighboring counties describe atmospheric conditions that meteorologists today would classify as impossible. The temperature fluctuated wildly between freezing and sweltering within minutes. Lightning struck the same locations repeatedly, and witnesses reported that the thunder seemed to echo from underground rather than from the sky above. Prudence lived with her parents, Jeremiah and Martha Hoffman, in a 1-room log cabin about 15 miles northeast of what would later become Branson, Missouri. The family had settled in the Ozarks just 3 years earlier, drawn by promises of fertile land and the opportunity to build a new life away from the crowded eastern settlements. They were devout Methodist people, simple farmers who attended church every Sunday and kept detailed records of their daily activities in handwritten journals that still exist today. Her footprints led from the front door across the muddy yard, through the vegetable garden where her mother grew beans and corn, and into the open field beyond where the family grazed their 2 dairy cows. The prints were perfectly preserved in the soft mud left by the storm, showing that she had been walking at a normal pace, not running as if fleeing from danger. Then, inexplicably, the tracks simply stopped existing in the middle of an open space roughly 50 yards from the tree line. What makes this disappearance truly terrifying is not just the impossible nature of the physical evidence, but the meticulous documentation that followed. Jeremiah Hoffman immediately organized a search party that included every able-bodied man within a 20-mile radius. They searched for 3 days straight, covering hundreds of square miles of dense forest and rocky terrain. They found no trace of Prudence anywhere, no torn clothing caught on branches, no additional footprints, no signs of struggle or evidence that she had ever existed beyond that final footprint in the mud. What happened exactly 72 hours later would fundamentally challenge everyone's understanding of reality. Prudence Hoffman returned home, walking through that same front door as if nothing had occurred, carrying herself with perfect composure, and showing no signs of distress, injury, or even fatigue. But the young woman who came back was no longer entirely the same person who had left. Her family immediately noticed disturbing changes that went far beyond anything that could be explained by a 3-day absence in the wilderness. Prudence spoke fluent Cherokee, despite having never encountered a single member of that tribe in her isolated mountain community. The nearest Cherokee settlement was over 200 miles away, and the Hoffman family had no books, no visitors, and no possible source for learning this complex language. More unnervingly, she demonstrated perfect knowledge of Latin and Greek, languages completely unknown to frontier settlements and certainly not taught to young women in rural Missouri. When questioned by the local minister, Reverend Joshua Blackwood, she recited entire passages from religious texts that had never been translated into English, including portions of ancient Coptic manuscripts and Aramaic prayers that wouldn't be discovered by European scholars for another 30 years. Reverend Blackwood, who had received his theological training at Yale College and considered himself well-educated in religious matters, was completely baffled by Prudence's sudden scholarly abilities. But the linguistic changes were only the beginning of something much more disturbing. Prudence displayed an intimate knowledge of her neighbor's private affairs that she could never have acquired through normal means. She knew that the merchant Samuel Patterson had been secretly watering down the milk he sold to other families. She revealed that Mrs. Eleanor Whitfield had been stealing small amounts of money from the church collection plate for over 2 years. Most shocking of all, she accurately described a violent argument between the blacksmith and his wife that had occurred inside their locked home while no one else was present. Dr. Samuel Morrison, the only educated physician within 100 miles, traveled from Springfield to examine Prudence at her family's desperate request. Morrison was a Harvard-trained doctor who had moved west to escape gambling debts, but he maintained meticulous medical records and approached each case with scientific rigor. His private journal, discovered in 1924 during the demolition of the old Morrison house, contains observations that would be considered impossible by the medical understanding of that era. Morrison documented that Prudence's eye color had changed from a brown that her family clearly remembered to an unusual shade of green that seemed to shift and move like liquid mercury. Under direct lamplight, her pupils would occasionally flash with what he described as an inner illumination that appears to originate from behind the eye itself rather than being reflected from an external source. More disturbing, her body temperature registered consistently at 94 degrees Fahrenheit, 3 degrees below normal, yet she showed no signs of illness, distress, or any of the symptoms typically associated with hypothermia. Morrison also noted unusual physical changes that had no medical precedent. Prudence's heartbeat had slowed to 45 beats per minute, well below normal but not dangerously so, and her breathing had become so shallow and regular that it was sometimes difficult to detect without placing a hand directly on her chest. Her reflexes had become extraordinarily sharp, and she demonstrated an uncanny ability to sense approaching visitors long before they came into view of the cabin. The most chilling detail in Morrison's notes concerns what he called temporal awareness. Prudence began making specific predictions about future events with horrifying accuracy. She warned that the minister's wife would die in childbirth exactly 6 months and 4 days hence, that a fire would consume Peterson's general store on the third Tuesday of the following April, and that the unusually harsh winter approaching would kill exactly 37 head of livestock in their valley. Every single prediction came to pass with precise timing, down to the exact dates and specific details that seemed impossible to foresee. These prophetic abilities extended beyond simple predictions to include detailed knowledge about events that had occurred decades before her birth. Prudence could describe the brutal winter of 1809 with perfect accuracy, naming settlers who had died before she was born, and recounting private conversations between people who had been dead for 20 years. She knew that old Mrs. Hendricks had hidden a small fortune in gold coins beneath the floorboards of her cabin before dying in 1823, information that proved accurate when the family finally worked up the courage to investigate. But these revelations were only the beginning of something much darker. Prudence claimed to remember being in what she described as the space between moments, a place where she encountered other versions of herself from different times. She spoke of meeting an elderly woman who claimed to be herself in the year 1841, a middle-aged version from 1855, and a child who insisted they were Prudence from 1827. These encounters, she said, occurred in a vast library built from stone that didn't exist in this world, filled with books written in languages that caused physical pain to look at directly. The library, according to Prudence's detailed descriptions, existed in a space where time flowed differently. She could spend what felt like months exploring its endless corridors and reading from books that contained complete histories of worlds that might have been, then return to find that only moments had passed in what she called the primary timeline. The books themselves were bound in materials she couldn't identify, filled with symbols that rearranged themselves while being observed, and contained knowledge about sciences and technologies that wouldn't be discovered for centuries. Her family initially dismissed these stories as fever dreams or the result of trauma from her mysterious 3-day absence. However, Prudence's claims took on a more sinister tone when she began demonstrating knowledge that seemed to come directly from this impossible library. She drew detailed diagrams of mechanical devices that wouldn't be invented for decades, described medical procedures that were far beyond the capabilities of frontier medicine, and made mathematical calculations that local educated men couldn't verify, but later proved to be correct. The community's growing fear reached a breaking point when Prudence revealed detailed knowledge about events that had occurred in complete privacy. She told the blacksmith about his hidden gambling debts and his plan to leave town with money stolen from a traveling merchant. She informed Mrs. Patterson about her husband's affair with a woman 3 counties away, providing specific dates and locations for their secret meetings. Most disturbing of all, she accurately described the contents of sealed letters that hadn't yet been opened, including an inheritance notice that wouldn't arrive for another 2 weeks. This revelation led to a horrifying discovery that church officials had desperately tried to conceal. After consulting baptismal records, cemetery plots, and personal journals dating back to the earliest settlements, Reverend Blackwood uncovered a pattern that defied all rational explanation. Over the past 50 years, 7 other young women had disappeared from the Ozark community under identical mysterious circumstances. All had vanished during severe thunderstorms. All had left footprints that stopped abruptly in open fields. All had returned after exactly 72 hours. All had exhibited the same strange abilities. And all had died precisely 7 years after their return, always on the anniversary of their original disappearance. The records reveal their names and the disturbing similarities in their cases. Martha Cornwell disappeared in 1784 and returned speaking fluent French and demonstrating knowledge of European court politics that a frontier woman could never have acquired. Sarah Mackenzie vanished in 1791 and came back with an encyclopedic understanding of botanical medicine that saved dozens of lives during a typhoid outbreak. Rebecca Foster disappeared in 1798 and returned the ability to predict weather patterns with supernatural accuracy, helping the community avoid crop failures for years. Elizabeth Hartwell vanished in 1805 and came back speaking what linguists would later identify as ancient Sumerian, reciting historical events from civilizations that had been dead for thousands of years. Mary Catherine Reeves disappeared in 1812 and returned during the height of the War of 1812 with detailed knowledge about British military movements that proved invaluable to local militia units. Agnes Sullivan vanished in 1819 and came back with advanced mathematical abilities that helped her design more efficient farming techniques and building methods. The last case before Prudence was Ruth Blackwood, the minister's own younger sister, who disappeared in 1826. She returned with the ability to diagnose medical conditions with unprecedented accuracy and knowledge of surgical techniques that were decades ahead of contemporary medical practice. Ruth saved countless lives during a diphtheria epidemic, but her growing obsession with returning to what she called the place of infinite knowledge became increasingly disturbing to her family. Each woman's death certificate, when they existed at all, listed cause of death as unknown natural causes. But the private notes of various local physicians told a more disturbing story. The women hadn't simply died. Their bodies had undergone some form of transformation that 19th century medicine couldn't begin to explain. They became something that was no longer entirely human, and their deaths were accompanied by phenomena that witnesses struggled to describe coherently. Armed with this terrifying knowledge, Dr. Morrison began a more intensive study of Prudence, documenting changes that accelerated as her 7-year deadline approached. Her hair began growing at an impossible rate, requiring cutting every few days, yet the texture changed from the coarse brown strands typical of frontier women to something resembling fine silk that seemed to generate its own faint luminescence in complete darkness. Her fingernails hardened into something that more closely resembled bone or horn, and her skin took on a translucent quality that revealed the movement of blood vessels underneath. Most unervingly, she stopped aging altogether, maintaining the exact same appearance she had possessed upon her return from the mysterious 3 days. While her family and friends aged normally over the passing years, Prudence remained frozen at 19, her face unmarked by time, weather, or the harsh conditions of frontier life. Photographs taken during the later years of her transformation show a woman who appears to exist slightly outside of normal reality, as if she were somehow not entirely present in the same dimension as everyone around her. What truly terrified those who observed her was Prudence's growing obsession with the place she claimed to have visited. She spent hours each day drawing intricate maps of locations that couldn't exist in known geography, geometric patterns that seemed to shift and change when viewed from different angles, and symbols that made observers feel inexplicably nauseous or disoriented. The drawings themselves seemed to possess some form of mild psychoactive properties, causing headaches and disturbing dreams in anyone who studied them for extended periods. She spoke constantly about needing to prepare the way for something she called the convergence, explaining that the barriers between different realities were weakening and that soon it would be possible for travelers from the space between worlds to move freely between dimensions. This convergence, she claimed, would fundamentally alter the nature of human existence, bringing knowledge and technologies from civilizations that existed in parallel timelines or alternate versions of history. The indigenous Cherokee people of the region, when finally consulted by desperate settlers, revealed ancient warnings about the Ozark Mountains that had been passed down through oral tradition for hundreds of generations. They spoke of places where the earth was thin, locations where other worlds pressed close to ours and sometimes broke through during times of atmospheric disturbance. These sites, they explained, were to be avoided at all costs, especially during storms when the electromagnetic conditions created by lightning strikes could temporarily weaken the barriers between realities. The Cherokee medicine man known as Standing Bear traveled from the tribal lands to examine Prudence personally. His reaction was immediate and terrifying. Upon seeing her, he recoiled as if struck by a physical blow and began speaking rapidly in Cherokee while making protective gestures. Through an interpreter, he explained that she carried the mark of the space walkers, beings who existed between worlds and occasionally took human form to explore different realities. He warned that her presence would attract others of her kind, and that the entire community was in grave danger from forces that human minds were not equipped to understand. Standing Bear's solution was both simple and horrifying. Prudence had to be returned to the place between worlds before her 7 years elapsed, or the barrier keeping other entities at bay would collapse completely, allowing unrestricted travel between dimensions that could fundamentally alter the nature of reality itself. He explained that the 7-year limit was not arbitrary, but represented the maximum time a human consciousness could maintain coherence while carrying knowledge from other dimensions. Beyond that point, the individual would either die or transform into something no longer recognizably human. What happened next would haunt everyone present for the rest of their lives and create whispered legends that persist in the Ozark Mountains to this day. On October 12, 1841, exactly one day before her 7-year deadline, Prudence Hoffman walked out of her family's cabin during another violent thunderstorm that exhibited the same impossible characteristics as the storm during which she had originally disappeared. This time, however, several witnesses followed her at what they considered a safe distance, determined to finally understand the truth behind these supernatural disappearances. The group included her father, Jeremiah, Dr. Morrison, Reverend Blackwood, and 3 other men from the community who had lost female relatives to similar disappearances over the years. What they observed challenged every fundamental belief about the nature of reality, time, and human existence. Prudence walked directly to the same field where her footprints had vanished 7 years earlier, moving with purpose and showing no fear despite the violent weather conditions surrounding her. As lightning split the sky above with unusual frequency and intensity, the air itself seemed to tear open like fabric, revealing glimpses of that impossible stone library she had described in such detail over the previous years. The witnesses reported seeing countless other figures moving within this tear in reality, all appearing to be variations of Prudence herself at different ages and from different time periods, as if every possible version of her from every possible timeline had gathered for this moment of convergence. The library visible through the dimensional rift was exactly as Prudence had described. Endless corridors of stone shelves filled with books bound in unknown materials, illuminated by light that seemed to originate from the air itself rather than from any visible source. The witnesses could see other individuals moving through the library, some recognizably human, others possessing forms that defied description, all apparently engaged in some form of scholarly activity among the impossible texts. As she approached the opening between worlds, Prudence turned back to face the terrified observers. Her appearance had changed dramatically in the final moments before her departure. Her eyes now glowed with an inner light that was clearly visible even in the midst of the lightning-filled storm. Her skin had become almost completely transparent, and her voice, when she spoke, came from everywhere and nowhere at once, carrying harmonics that human vocal cords couldn't possibly produce. She said simply, "Tell them that the doors are opening. Tell them that soon all the lost ones will come home. The convergence approaches, and humanity will learn that they have never been alone in their reality." Then she stepped to the tear in the fabric of space-time, which sealed itself immediately, leaving behind only the scent of ozone and the echo of thunder that continued rumbling long after the storm had passed and the natural weather patterns had returned to normal. But the most chilling discovery was still to come. When Dr. Morrison's medical equipment was recovered from the Hoffman cabin the following morning, his instruments revealed readings that shouldn't have been possible according to any known scientific principles. The thermometer that had consistently shown Prudence's temperature at 94 degrees now registered absolute zero, as if it had been exposed to the vacuum of space. His microscope slides, which had contained samples of her hair and skin tissue, showed cellular structures that resembled no known form of life on Earth, displaying geometric patterns that seemed to exist in more than 3 dimensions. The official cause of Prudence Hoffman's death was listed as natural causes following prolonged illness, but Dr. Morrison's private autopsy notes told a different story entirely. Her body, recovered from the field the following morning in the exact spot where she had disappeared, had undergone a transformation that defied all medical understanding of that era and would still be considered impossible by modern science today. Her organs had crystallized into a substance that resembled quartz but displayed properties that no known mineral possessed, including the ability to generate faint electrical currents and emit barely audible harmonic frequencies. Her bones had become hollow like those of a bird, but the internal structure showed a complexity that suggested they had been designed for purposes far beyond simple locomotion. Her brain showed neural pathways that formed geometric patterns impossible in normal human development, creating structures that seemed to extend beyond the physical boundaries of her skull. Most disturbing of all, Morrison's notes record that Prudence's body continued showing signs of electrical activity for 3 full days after death, as if some part of her consciousness was still present and trying to communicate. Witnesses reported that her eyes would occasionally open and track movement around the room, though she never spoke again. The electrical activity finally ceased at sunset on the 3rd day, coinciding with another brief but violent thunderstorm that lasted exactly 13 minutes. The mystery of Prudence Hoffman was officially closed with her burial in the small cemetery overlooking the Ozark Valley, but her grave marker contains an inscription that has puzzled visitors for nearly 2 centuries. She walks between the worlds and waits for the convergence. No one could explain who had carved these words or what they meant, as the Hoffman family claimed no knowledge of the inscription's origin. However, documents recently discovered in the basement of the old Springfield courthouse suggest that phenomena similar to Prudence's case have continued occurring in the region with alarming and increasing regularity. Modern missing persons reports describe disappearances that follow the exact same pattern: 3-day absences during severe weather, impossible physical evidence, and returns that leave the victims fundamentally changed. What makes these contemporary cases even more disturbing is their accelerating frequency and the fact that many of the returnees now display knowledge of advanced technologies and scientific principles that won't be developed for decades. While the historical record shows decades between each occurrence, recent reports suggest that the barriers between worlds are weakening at an exponential rate. Climate scientists have documented unusual electromagnetic readings in the Ozark region that intensified during severe weather systems, creating atmospheric conditions that shouldn't occur according to established meteorological models. Geological surveys have identified underground formations that don't match any known mineral compositions, suggesting the presence of materials that may not have originated on Earth. Perhaps most unnervingly, several witnesses to recent disappearances report seeing the same impossible stone library that Prudence described, now visible through tears in reality that last longer and appear more frequently than ever before. These dimensional rifts have been photographed by hiking enthusiasts and investigated by amateur paranormal researchers, though official agencies quickly confiscate any evidence that surfaces publicly. Local authorities have classified these reports under national security guidelines, but leaked documents suggest that federal agencies have established a permanent monitoring station in the Ozark Mountains and are taking a very serious interest in the escalating frequency of these interdimensional incidents. The implications of what they may have discovered remain classified at the highest levels of government. The truth about what happened to Prudence Hoffman challenges our most basic assumptions about the nature of time, space, human consciousness, and our place in a universe that may be far more crowded with intelligent life than we ever imagined. Her case suggests that our reality might be just one of countless parallel dimensions, separated by barriers so thin that they can be crossed by those who possess the knowledge and courage to walk between worlds. Yet deep in the Missouri hills, where the wind carries whispers of ancient secrets and storm clouds gather with unnatural frequency, residents still report seeing a young woman walking to the fields on nights when lightning splits the sky. She appears unchanged from that October evening in 1834, still 19 years old, still carrying knowledge from places that exist between the moments of our world. And according to those brave enough to approach her ghostly figure, she's no longer alone. She walks now with 7 other women, all carrying the same otherworldly knowledge, all waiting for the convergence that will finally allow them to return home to the space between realities. The question that haunts the Ozark Mountains isn't whether Prudence Hoffman will return, but whether humanity is prepared for what she'll bring with her when the barriers between worlds finally collapse completely. And don't miss our next video. Subscribe to the channel and enter the placelet and follow other stories so intriguing and frightening like this. Click on the screen to watch it now.